DESIblitz.com.
Yeah, I thought it was really nice to see so much passion in the room and get some, diverse points of view about storytelling. There was a lot of energy in the room, and a couple of really interesting workshop articles when I thought there's some real talent in this room, and I hope that they take some of the stuff that we covered and move forward and have some completed manuscripts. I think the main takeaways are persistence. It took me 10 years to write Streets of Darkness, 1.2 million unsuccessful words. But what happens is you fail early, fail often, and most importantly, you fail forward. And I think taking that away from the workshop, that this is not an overnight success. It takes a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication. But you know what? Writers write. And if you love writing and you continue doing so, and you continue to improve, there's no reason why you can't be successful at it.
The workshop was brilliant, really, really useful. It was clear, and I find it quite inspiring because I'm trying to work on something at the moment, and it's having that bit of like, oh, how can I make it better? How can I make it that just before I submit it, what can I do to get it across the line? And I'm not saying I would be able to follow through, but it was definitely helpful of trying to think, okay, this is where they're thinking. Some I already knew, and other things were more surprising, like, okay, I haven't thought of it like that. So yeah, it's very good.
I think probably because we've been underrepresented for such a long time that they don't realise that there are new emerging markets out there. There are new emerging writers. You've got I'm writing crime fiction. You've got Abir Mukherjee, Alex Khan, Vaseem Khan, Imran Mahmood. Absolutely a standout novel. You Don't Know Me last year, psychological thriller. So I think that actually they probably haven't been represented for such a long time that it's going to take a while to change that narrative and for them to realise that actually there is representation taking place now.
I think the main thing I've learned is about character, even though character is important. But I found that when you talked about when you lead with the character and the certain things to develop, really helpful, and the questions about the character. I don't think I've ever thought of it in that much depth before, so I'll definitely go away using some of those helpful hints.
So basically, I did a workshop talking a little bit about what the BBC Writers' Room does. We're essentially a department in the BBC that discover, develop and work with writers at every stage of their career. So I was just talking a little bit about what the opportunities are in the BBC, the sort of schemes and initiatives that we run for new writers, and also what we look for when we read scripts, offering some tips and advice and practical things for the writers to take away from today.
I found the workshop incredibly insightful. It was good for me as a writer to refresh my mind about things that I knew and things that I've learnt along the way, but I might have not necessarily forgotten, but they kind of do slip to the back of your mind when you are writing your script. So it was kind of a really great opportunity to get that refresher, to think, right, okay, this is what I need to be making sure I do and I hit every time that I write my script.
I think the workshop's been a great success. I've had some really positive feedback on the writers feeling like they got a lot of useful advice and some really useful tips, and just to hear from someone that works in the industry, coming in to speak to them and offering those insights to new writers on what to think about. I think that's been really, really useful for them. And also I did a more general top tips on what to think about when you are writing your scripts or starting to think about developing stories and characters. And I think that's been really, really useful to them, is because I've been and demonstrated that with showing some clips that demonstrate great drama and great storytelling. And I think that's the part that the writers really felt useful, because it helped to really emphasize the points that I was making, and it's just a great way of getting interaction in the workshop as well.
What do I feel I learned from the workshop today? I think kind of reaffirms some of the things that as writers we should be doing. So captivating characters, intriguing open scenes, and obviously with the craft of with screenplay as opposed to novel writing, showing as much as you can with actions and visual rather than dialogue per se. Yeah, no, it's really good.
I think for me the main The thing that I learned that I think will stick with me the most is that the importance of hooking your audience in the first 10 pages. We did discuss that a lot of the time. Scripts that come through BBC Writers' Room, a lot of the writers were doing that at like the 15th page or the 20th page, but how important it is to get that in the first 10 pages. And I think moving forward, and even like scripts that I've already started or written, I think I'm going to go back and look at them again and think, how can I do this differently to get that? And I think it's really informed in the past if I've submitted a script to a scheme or something like that, if it wasn't chosen or not the first time round, is that the reason why? And I think that's something that moving forward will improve and inform my writing.
From a BBC Writers' Room perspective, we are always on the lookout for diverse writers. We want to hear from writers that have interesting stories to tell and that can tell us about a particular community or a particular world that we've not seen represented on TV. So it's absolutely one of our remits to discover, develop writers that are from BAME backgrounds and communities. And we look at diversity in every sense of the word, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of disability, in terms of gender, sexual orientation. So we kind of cover diversity across the board, and we are always looking for writers that are from diverse backgrounds, and that's definitely one of our remits at the Writers' Room.
My workshop was called How to Be a Journalist, and it was about journalism and how to get into the media. And I was partly talking about my own experiences, but also talking about what are the sort of skills and things that you need to try and crack the industry. Yeah, I thought it was really, really interesting actually, because it was quite a small group, and what was quite good about that was that it was a chance to talk a little bit more in depth with each individual. So rather than just sort of doing some big kind of lecture where you're just talking to a bunch of people in a sort of anonymous way, you can speak a little bit more one-on-one and get to know them a little bit more and find out what their particular interests are. So it felt like it became a bit more of a bespoke session rather than just something that was a bit too general.
I found the workshop extremely interesting and valuable. I'm an MA student here at BCU at the moment, studying journalism, and it's always good to have an insight from someone who has come from absolutely nothing and didn't even know he wanted to be a journalist, but had that one idea that led him into the career that he's got today. So yeah, it was really inspiring to hear and to learn from someone who's so passionate about his job even now.
So the most interesting thing in the workshop was the concept of you don't always have to be the greatest writer. You can, particularly when you're doing like first-person stories, think of just very good angles and ideas, and it's really about having an idea and going with that idea and having a go and being proactive. And I think that was the most important thing that I learned today.
So we learned a lot about writing about yourself, so not necessarily an autobiography, but always finding something interesting in your life as well and being able to interest a wider audience. I've also learned lots of practical advice, so about pitching to magazines, breaking into travel writing, which is a particularly competitive field. So yeah, I've just had a great opportunity to be able to ask all of those questions and really get some good practical advice.
So we had a little discussion first about our interest in journalism and that type of thing. And then during that process, we went off and we interviewed each other and tried to find out the most interesting 3 things we could about each person that we spoke to. And then we fed back to the group, and then we discussed how those interesting facts can be turned into stories with a slightly edgier sort of, I guess, direction, which would make them interesting, and how quite often we don't see ourselves as interesting, but it's about how you dig a bit deeper and look for the interesting part of what you think is not an interesting story.
So my workshop was delivered with Shagufta, and it was on poetry. So how do you explore different techniques? We started it off with writing, and then it became like performance. So how do you then take writing from a page to perform?
I think the workshop went really, really well. You can get to delve and get really intimate with the conversations that you're having, but also mainly with the
the types of writing and the techniques that we go through in one workshop is so beneficial for people to take away and reuse in the future. So it's almost like they come for a masterclass, but they can pick up all of the tips and just run it throughout their course of writing.
And what was your workshop on?
I think the workshop went great. It was so nice to see so many people change their views about poetry, that poetry can be azad, it can be free. It doesn't have to be traditional old verse poetry, but it can be contemporary and it can be something new and fresh. They were very, very engaged and they found it very, very useful. I think they hadn't seen something like this before. So for them to experience seeing poetry bilingual, seeing poetry not just in English, but a mixture of Punjabi and Hindi was definitely something new, but also that there is space for poetry like this.
I think the landscape has changed a lot over the last few years. Like when I started 10 years ago, it was quite difficult as a young Muslim female artist, spoken word artist, both from within our communities of going, that's not a real thing that you do, and then from kind of the mainstream community going, you don't look like everybody else that's here. And you get into this a little bit of like, am I good enough? Is it me? Is it, but actually it's something that you can't change. And more recently it's become better with organisations that have set up like, DESIblitz as Beat Freaks that are welcoming different voices from different communities that spans across ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic background, and you go, yeah, you're valued and your voice matters and let's do something. What do you want to do? And that ownership is now going back the other way.
I think they've never seen it done before. That's why, and also because we're so used to seeing the old school thought of poetry being traditional, written in a certain way, in a certain form, so we don't think that it doesn't have to be something else.
It was really enjoyable, and I think often people who come to these workshops have an interest in writing themselves anyway and want to learn more techniques. I think we can get to a point when we're writing and we run out of ways to motivate ourselves to continue writing, and these are really good spaces to come into to tap into techniques and exercises and learn skills about your own writing, your own voice, and push yourself. So if you're looking to do that at any stage of your writing career, I would always recommend you go to a writer's workshop and you learn from other writers and your peers within that group as well. I think you learn a lot from.
What do you think there's not as many people as we'd like to see from BAME communities involved in this kind of activity?
I think that's a tricky one. I think it depends on where you go. I think you've got a real group of young people who are involved in the creative and art scenes and they're doing really well, but it's very much DIY cultures that they're doing. I do feel like we still live in a society where institutionally the big art spaces that are supposed to be for everyone aren't for everyone, and they don't engage with and they don't offer art and creative spaces that are reflective of everyone who lives in these cities. So I think that's probably the reason why some people get put off of coming to particular creative spaces. And I think it's a conversation that we've been having for such a long time about why are BME people not engaged in, and what can we do more to engage BME people. And I think it's just literally turning up and just rocking up into those spaces, the spaces that they use, the spaces that they are familiar with and feel comfortable going into. And I think that's what this has been really useful about coming to a university space. It's about linking with your audience and coming to your audience rather than expecting them to come to you.
I think definitely like the work that's been done by DESIblitz, having more workshops, really interacting with perhaps maybe younger audiences, telling them, there is spaces for them, you can do this, it is possible.